Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope these little videos are helpful to you uh, as you work through the PowerPoint. So I do have a copy of the PowerPoint here in front of me along with the book. So I'm going to pick up now on page 263, Mothers, Fathers, and Co-Parenting. This section is talking about, and I kind of mentioned it before about parents as managers, so it's the same idea again, really, the author's bringing back up, is what are the mom's roles in the house and what are the dad's role? And once again, the mom does most of the managing, most of the support types of things, the meals and the appointments and all that. And so, because of that, they tend to spend more time with their kids than do dads. That's always a safe choice on a test, for instance, who spends more time with the kids uh, year after year when they look at this. And this applies worldwide, by the way. Generally speaking, moms spend more time directly with the kids than do dads. The problem with that is we're going to get to the section on conflict, and you go, okay, well, mom's the one that's feeding and fixing and taking care of things for them more often than dad is. You'd think that's the person that they would appreciate the most or get along with more often, but the truth of the matter is when we look at conflict, you're going to find that they have more conflict with mom than they do with dad. The reason for that is because they are spending more time with them, so there's more opportunity for disagreement and hearing no or getting disciplined for something, and so it leads to conflict. And we'll get on to that in the next section. So if moms spend more time to do more of the parenting, they end up getting the blame. That's not necessarily justified, but that's what happens. Well, what about dads? Uh, what they find consistently is dads spend less time, and your PowerPoint shows that 1/3 to 3/4 less time with their kids directly communicating with them than do moms. Now, there's a study in your book about inner city high crime, difficult neighborhoods, if you will, where there's lots of opportunities to kids get in trouble. So they talk about uh, an environment like that. So I want you to think of it this way. You have what you call an intact family. An intact family is a mom and a dad together, no divorce. And then you have what they call an absent father family, an absent father model, they call it. And so it's a single mom raising her kids. So if you can get this picture that in an inner city high crime area, let's say a projects in New Orleans, where it would be very easy for a young person to get into a life of crime and trouble and danger. Let's say these people live next door to each other, and this is basically how the study went. Within the same environment, all things being equal, that meaning drugs, gangs, violence, and so on, the only difference between, let's say, these two families living in that environment is in one house, single mom, the other house, husband and wife. And so what they have found, so pay attention here, is that the kids that are in the homes with the father present, now we're talking about he's doing the best he can. Obviously, if they're living in that situation, not wealthy, maybe can't provide everything, but they are given a lot of emotional support, teaching strong family values. In those homes, these kids were twice as likely to finish their education and or go on to a higher level of secondary vocational school, community college, or even university level education. Twice as likely as those kids growing up in that single parent home. 75% less likely for the young girls to end up pregnant, unwed, and starting another cycle of kids with no parent. And finally, the most important one in the population I've spent almost 39 years now working with is that 80% of those kids with the father in the home, 80% are less likely to end up in jail or prison someday. And that's a pretty big number. You rarely see a number as high as 80%. So that's a very, very strong correlation between having a good role model father in the picture in these adverse conditions to overcome that and still succeed and come out of that. Uh, so you might want to put a little check mark by that particular PowerPoint. Okay, like I said, uh, page 264 and the next PowerPoint talks about parent-adolescent conflict. A number of test questions on conflict. What you have to be careful is there's all kinds of different conflicts. This particular section is parent-adolescent conflict. So we're talking the parent and the confrontations they might have with their adolescent or their children or their adolescents. I've already talked to you about husband and wife and their relationship, direct and indirect. And then later on we're going to talk about sibling conflict. So the answers on the test are all different depending on the scenario. And so keep that in mind as you're reading the question, because the answer is going to be different for each. Now, I guess the simplest way to start this is to say that when parents have small children in the home, they're going to have less conflict with their small children because they're going to pretty much be able to dictate and expect obedience. And so there aren't going to be a lot of confrontations with a 5 or a 6-year-old between the parent and the child. But as the young person moves into early adolescence, and put a star by that, if you were looking at this as a bell curve, might be a good visualization. As you reach the peak of that bell curve, that's early adolescence. That's when there's going to be the most frequent conflicts with your kids in a household. And so early adolescence, it increases sharply because of some of the things we've already talked about under maturation, about the biological, cognitive, and social factors of kids. In fact, I just said that, and I need to go back to the social factors. I don't remember lecturing that part to you. I may have stopped and not gone back to it, so I'll get to it in just a second. But if the question is about the parents are having the most, and we're talking frequency, and that's another thing here, frequency. There's frequency and there's intensity when it comes to conflict. Frequency just means the number of conflicts. Intensity means how serious are they. So if the question is about the frequency of conflicts within the house the parents are having with the kids, then it is likely that you're going to pick an early adolescent living in their home. According to research, then as they move into late adolescence, the frequency decreases. The confrontations with their teenagers begins to go down. Well, the question there is why? And it goes back to what I've already told you about parents spending time with their kids. As kids move into late adolescence and they develop this social world, and that's what reminded me of the biological, cognitive, and social, they begin having more activities outside the home and spend more time with friends and less time around parents. So the less time you're around somebody, the less frequent opportunity for a disagreement or a conflict. And so they think that's what's happening. The kids are busy in their own little social world, and they're not at home as much around the parents. So the number, the frequency, it doesn't mean the intensity, but the frequency is going to begin to decrease. So if you know what a bell curve is, childhood would be down here, early adolescence would be here, late adolescence and emerging adults would begin fewer and fewer in frequency. Now let me go back to what I was talking about of frequency and what that means is that somewhere between 75 and 80% of our families here in America are going to experience what we call typical conflict. Maybe write in the word normal. So typical or normal conflict is quite common in families across America. So if the question is the majority of families in America experience, you're going to say the majority experiences typical or common conflict. That means these things are pretty routine for most all families with their kids. They didn't do a chore. They forgot to turn in their homework assignment. They're fussing with their sibling about something. It's a lot of small things, but they're quite common. And so that's what I mean by typical. So that's 75 to 80% of our families. Okay. The other type of conflict, however, is serious, and they call that prolonged intense conflict. Now that's going to be experienced by 20 to 25% of our families, and this is a high risk group. So in the typical 75 to 80%, you don't really need outside intervention. You're not going to have probation officers or judges or police officers, or even probably not even the need for family counseling. But in the prolonged intense conflict, the 20 to 25% group, which is about 4 to 5 million families in America, this is not even so much about frequency, it's about intensity. You might see the word degree. So the intensity in this group goes up and it's prolonged. So it's not just having a bad weekend of with your teenager. It's been going on probably for years, and it's continuing to get worse. So this is a whole different group. So with this group, you're looking at things where you probably are going to need intervention. Whether you want it or not, you may have courts, probation officers, juvenile detention centers, group homes like that I run, and your kid is taken out of your custody and placed someplace to get treatment or even incarcerated. So these are the groups we're talking about. We call this a at-risk or high-risk group. They're high risk of dropping out of school, drugs, violence, incarceration. So I've given you a list of some examples like running away from home. And we're talking chronic runaway, not a kid just leaving for the night and feeling bad about it coming back. But these kids truly want to get away for various reasons. They don't want to abide by rules. They want to do what they want. And the families have no idea where their kids are. Juvenile delinquency. Again, these people are dealing with kids who are out there breaking the law. And the parents they won't follow a curfew. They're hanging out with other kids who are breaking the law. Serious problems at school. Typical, it's just going to be you forgot a homework assignment. No big deal. Let's pick it up. But this group here, these kids want to quit school. They're refusing to go to school. They're being arrested for truancy. The family thinks they're at school and they're just going around the corner and not even showing up to school. And so it's much, much more serious behavior at school that's resulting in expulsion, which is another whole problem for these families. And then I've got a few other things could be involved again in sexual behavior at a young age and creating problems and becoming pregnant as young teenagers, affiliating with gangs and hanging out with other kids who are in serious trouble, and substance abuse. And so a lot of times in these families, these kids are turning to drugs, and that in itself is a whole issue for these families. What I would do here, as just a suggestion, is the first one I listed was runaway behavior, meaning chronic runaway. I would draw a line between that one down to the bottom and drugs or substance abuse and write the word strong correlation. If you remember from chapter 1, a strong correlation means that there is directly a strong relationship between two variables. In this case, they're saying that there is a strong correlation or relationship between kids who chronically run away from home and kids who do drugs. And it goes both ways, so it's reciprocal. Kids who do drugs tend to run away so they can do more drugs. Kids who run away for other reasons get out on the street and they meet other kids and they start doing drugs. But in either case, if these families are dealing with one issue, they're probably dealing with the other. These two things go together. And so they call that prolonged, intense conflict, and it can create a lot of havoc within the family. A lot of outside intervention is necessary. I'm turning to page 266 and the PowerPoint on autonomy. So we're in the section autonomy and attachment. And so looks like autonomy is being covered first, so that's fine. So what we're talking about is autonomy really means self-governing or autonomous or independent, making your own decisions. Well, we know that kids aren't self-governing, kids aren't totally self-sufficient, but they're moving in that direction, and of course that's our goal, is to help them be prepared for autonomy, to be able to move on into independence. So here I want to talk about the connection between parenting styles and autonomy, because while you will have test questions on the 4 different parenting styles by Diana Baumrind that I covered in the last video, we're going to revisit those parenting styles as they are connected to other things. And so in this particular PowerPoint, it talks about autonomy and authoritative parents and autonomy and authoritarian parents. So let me just try to keep it brief and simple. There's a strong correlation between a positive outcome or emotionally stable young people moving towards autonomy when they're raised in homes in which it's authoritative style. Because in the authoritative style, the parents are going to give the young people more and more freedom and responsibility, privilege, as they show themselves to be responsible, and that is their goal. They're helping their kids become more autonomous, and that's a good thing. In the authoritarian style, they're never interested in helping their kids become autonomous and independent, because they're going to maintain control until that kid moves out of the house. And so the kid never really learns to navigate and negotiate and take on some responsibilities, because the parents are making all the decisions and keeping all the control. So simply put, authoritative is directly involved with a positive outcome regarding autonomy, a high level of autonomy. Authoritarian is negative outcome with a decrease or a lower level of autonomy in those families. Now, if you're asked questions about gender or ethnicity or other cultures, I think most people probably would know this, but here in America, we allow our young people, both male and female, more autonomy at a younger age than a lot of other cultures. So our kids are out there doing things. They have cell phones at younger ages. They're dating at younger ages. They're going places without parental supervision, to the mall and to ball games and with their friends. So that's quite common here in America in our culture. By the way, I was looking at this PowerPoint, and the example that we're using is kids strive for autonomy from parents earlier than adolescents from Eastern cultures. So that's what I'm talking about in a Western culture, being us, comparing maybe an Eastern or even a Middle Eastern country. By gender, we allow our males, our sons, more autonomy at a younger age than we do our daughters, generally speaking. So our teenage boys typically experience more independence at a younger age than we allow our daughters. Does that mean they're more mature? Not necessarily. It just means we allow them and we protect our daughters for a little bit longer period of time when it comes to autonomy. Attachment, well, I see I have a screen. I will get to attachment here in just a second. But adolescent runaways, I mentioned it a minute ago. The author, I'm not sure, I don't see it on this page, but let me cover it for you, because there may be a question about it, about runaway behavior. And again, we're talking chronic runaway behavior. These are kids who seriously don't want to return home for whatever reasons. The author touches on 2 basic reasons. One is to escape a bad situation, and by that I mean could be abuse, neglect, high conflict, like we discussed on prolonged in conflict. In other words, it's a nightmare to live in that home, and kids just finally decide anything's better than being here, and they take off. But the other reason kids run away is rebelling against the rules. Their parents may be reasonable people and their rules may be reasonable, but the kids simply don't want to comply or abide by them. They want to be on their own. They're determined to make their own decisions and live their own life, and they feel like their parents shouldn't, or maybe they feel their parents are too strict and they'll take off because of that. So just keep that in mind. I don't have a lot of time today for this segment because I don't like to make these too long. I like you to be able to digest it, look at it, and kind of go back and look at it, what I'm talking about. But let me just introduce, since I have a minute or so here, of attachment and connectedness. So you're gonna need to be familiar with the terms secure attachment and insecure attachment. And so secure attachment does not mean clinging to the parent, what we call separation anxiety, where the kid is just doesn't feel safe away from the parent. I want you to think of secure attachment as a positive thing. Some people would call it bonding, where how important it is at the beginning of life for the parent and the child to form a bond in which there's trust and the child believes that they are definitely looked out for and cared about. And so that's really what secure attachment is. Again, be introducing some names that we haven't had any names lately, but some researchers called Bowlby and Ainsworth, so kind of remember those names, have come up with this concept. A concept is an idea that they have, and their concept and what they believe is that secure attachment, this is important, look at it again, secure attachment is essential, underline it, put a circle by it, that means it's necessary, that during infancy it is essential for the eventual development of a socially competent teenager. So the key terms here is that it happens during infancy, it's absolutely necessary or essential if eventually during adolescence you want to have a young person who is socially competent. A socially competent teenager is one who is emotionally stable, well adjusted, they have friends, they know how to make friends, keep friends, and get along with other people. So those are all positive things. They just believe that if you don't have secure attachment with your child during infancy, those first few years, then you're going to struggle later on with those kids, and or those kids are going to struggle. So that's all the time I have today. I will have to finish secure attachment on the next video.